Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam Bailey and today we're looking at how you can fix halos and sharpening outlines around your photos. Let's go. Okay, so today we're looking at how you can fix the halos around elements in your photos. This is a really common issue that can be quite distracting and make you look a bit amateurish. And many people don't know what causes this or how it can be fixed, so they end up just leaving it in their images, which is a shame since it's really distracting. And why is distracting bad? Because we want people to be immersed in our images, not distracted by the edit. If the edit is noticeable in any way, then it pulls us out of the image, so the edit should be transparent. But anyway, I'm going to show you how you can easily avoid that. But before we do that, let's just work out why this is happening. So if we can know why it's happening, we can avoid it. Halos usually happen around the edges of areas of hard contrasting elements in your scene where you've over-edited or over-sharpened. For example, where mountains meet sky or trees in front of a bright background, things like that. Anywhere where there's two or more blocks of contrasting colour with a hard edge. The effect is usually created by adding too much contrast in the form of sharpening or clarity or texture, or by too heavy-handed reduction of highlights or shadow areas. And when any kind of contrast is added to a scene, it's possible for this to happen, and particularly with tools that add contrast to sharpen. Since what contrast and sharpening in particular does is to brighten bright pixels and darken the adjacent dark pixels. But yes, prevention is better than cure, and so learning what causes this in the first place can help you to avoid it and the time-consuming process of eradicating it, which is what we're going to look at in a minute. I think the first port of call would just be generally not to go overboard with any particular slider. What a lot of us tend to do with landscape images is to whack up the shadows to 100%, decrease the highlights 100%, in an attempt to maximize the dynamic range of the image. But this is one of the principal ways in which we can introduce haloing to our images. So say you want to recover highlights in your sky, it may be better to use a gradient mask so that by the time that darkening reaches the transition between the sky and the land or the trees or whatever it is, then it is feathered out and it isn't darkening the sky right next to the land, and hopefully it'll avoid any weird haloing. So next we'll talk about contrast, clarity and texture. So make sure you're not overdoing it with the contrast, clarity and texture sliders. I never usually go over +20 on clarity and texture, and often find myself reducing these into negative figures more than actually boosting them. Why? Because besides the side effects of haloing, it creates a very crunchy digital look to your image, and over sharpening and adding too much contrast is rather a giveaway of an inexperienced photo editor. So if you need to fix stuff, if you're going for a particular look in your edit, you've achieved it, but you're having the side effect and it's ruining things for you, then that's when you'll be in remedial action mode and it's off to Photoshop we go. So here we are, we've got the Glastonbury Tor Tower, and you can quite plainly see there's a huge ugly outline all the way around the outside of it, which has been caused by me reducing the highlights quite considerably to get this sort of moody sky. So prevention being better than cure, the first thing to do maybe would be to find a different way of approaching creating that moody sky. Maybe one way would be just to compromise and say, okay, actually let's just lighten the sky back up. But if you were hell-bent on having this sort of dark sky, then you would need to find another way to achieve that. You could use vignetting, you could use local masking, so you could use radial or gradient masks or a brush to darken down the sky and not sort of directly over the tower, or you could use luminosity masking, things like that. But let's just say you've created the look you want, you've spent a load of time trying to get your edit exactly the way you want it, and a nasty side effect of it is just simply this white outline, this halo that we want to get rid of. And you can see that that halo becomes more and more pronounced the more texture and sharpening and contrast and all this other stuff that we pile on it. It's just getting more and more accentuated, particularly with sharpening as well, which is one of the things that creates that very strong white outline. So what we'll do is, let's just say this is the look we were going for. I mean, it really isn't, but let's just say it is. I'm going to just take down my texture and clarity sliders. I can't bear that any longer. So we're going to have a go at just basically removing in Photoshop this outline. So right click your image, edit in Adobe Photoshop, and off we go. And what I've done is created a second duplicate layer, just so we've got a bit of a comparison. And we're going to select the clone stamp tool, and we're going to set the mode to darken or darken color. You can experiment with this. These are the ones that the blending modes that I've found most useful. You can set your flow to really anywhere you like. Essentially, the lower the flow, the more you might have to go over your work, like, you know, multiple brush strokes to actually achieve the effect you want. That can be good to just sort of give you a bit more control over what you're doing, or you can just set it hard so you can just work a bit quicker. So I'm going to set it around about, I don't know, 60%. We're going to sample the current layer, and that's fine. So what this is going to do with the mode on darken color is it's simply going to only affect the lighter pixels and leave the dark ones alone. So if we zoom into our image here, starting around about here where the halo becomes noticeable, and go back to our clone stamp tool, we're just going to sample an area of the image, and then we're going to use the very edge of the brush to just paint over the outline. And that, as you can see, is just going to darken only the halo and get rid of it. It's very effective. It's good to just sort of unclick your mouse, as it were, every now and then, so that if you do have to undo, you're not undoing absolutely everything you've just done. And just continue to resample from areas nearby what you're painting over, so that you're not going to darken the outline too much and create the opposite problem. If you make a mistake, you can always go back. You can see I'm not doing this perfectly, but for the sake of speed, we'll just go around this, and you can see the effect is going to be considerably better than it was before. Yeah, so we've got to do a similar job around the other side. I think it does generally work a bit more effectively if you just try to use the edge of the brush where it's softest. And you can see the area that it's sampling is moving alongside my brush. And that's usually fine, that's often fine, because it's just resampling different areas as I go, which means I don't have to keep on resampling. But if there's an area that gets a little bit too dark and it starts to show up, then you might need to just find a different area to sample from. So there we go, I've pretty much done that down there. Let's pop up the top and have a look. It's not too bad, there's a little bit of stuff around here, so just do around this section. And nearly done. Okay, let's have a look at the before and after. Okay, let's unhide that layer, and you can see it's done a really good job of just eradicating that outline. Okay, back in Lightroom, you can now see this is the original before we went to Photoshop, and this is what we did, and the outline is gone, and that looks so much better. There is one thing to obviously bear in mind, and that is that this is now a composite image of the changes that we made before we went into Photoshop. So all of the edits that were non-destructive that we applied in Lightroom have now been sort of consolidated and into the TIF file that we created when we saved it out of Photoshop. So if it really ought to be the last thing that you do in the process before you make your final image, rather than doing it halfway through and then going back into Lightroom and doing a bunch more edits. Yeah, you can also see that I didn't quite, I missed, there's a little bit of haloing across the top of the hill, which we could have sorted as well. It's not perfect, but you get the idea, and that is a very effective tool at removing that, that sharpening outline. Of course, I do think it's probably better to prevent it in the first place by just not going quite so crazy with your contrast and your highlights and shadows and things like that. So there we have it, guys. I hope that was helpful for you, and now I don't want to see a single halo anywhere online. No excuses. But if you found this helpful, I'd really appreciate a like, and please consider subscribing if you're not already. I'll be bringing tons more useful stuff your way, so stay tuned, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.